International Media TV. Television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Welcome to Brigade. My name is Matt Mahan. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Brigade, which is a relatively new startup based right here in San Francisco that is focused on addressing problems of declining civic participation and faith in government. And we do that by taking cutting-edge consumer and mobile technology and building experiences that help ordinary citizens declare their beliefs, find other like-minded people, and take collective action to shape the elections and the policies that affect their lives. If you're interested in seeing what we're up to, you can test our beta product, which we released just about 8 weeks ago, by going to brigade.com and also installing the mobile app either for iOS or Android. And the access code you can use is just join Brigade, all one word, lowercase. And we'd love your feedback. We're still in closed beta, but we'll open it up to all of you and would love to hear your thoughts. So this morning we are incredibly honored to have Governor O'Malley join us, along with some great panelists who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But I wanted to start by saying a few words about Governor O'Malley, who I've been following for quite a few years now. And I do have to preface this by saying the Brigade does not endorse candidates. We're just very happy to have them here to engage in dialogue. But I'm personally very excited to have Governor O'Malley here. So throughout his career, Governor O'Malley has really embraced innovation. As governor of Maryland, his state became a top 5 state for the number of startups per capita and for employment in the technology industry. He put together an initiative called the Maryland Innovation Initiative that raised $10 billion for early stage funding to seed promising innovations in companies. Not to mention that he's the first ever presidential candidate to host a civic-tech pitch competition, which he did last night. So please join me in welcoming Governor O'Malley. So I'm going to do quick intros of our other panelists. Please just come on up as I introduce you. So next, we'll be joined by Marcy Harris, who's the founder and CEO of PopVox. Thanks for being here, Marcy.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll hear more from each of the panelists, but just quick background. So PopVox is a civic engagement platform that meshes real-time legislative data with constituents' opinions and delivers citizens' input directly to their government officials. So it's great to have Marcy here. Thank you. Marcy also is a former congressional staffer. All right. Recovering? Yeah. Welcome to tech. Actually, you've been in tech longer than I have. All right. Next is Kimberly Bryant, who's the founder of Black Girls Code. Come on up, Kimberly. Welcome. And Black Girls Code works to increase the number of women of color in the digital space by empowering girls of color ages 7 to 17 to become innovators in STEM fields, leaders in their communities, and builders of their own futures through exposure to computer science and technology. Thanks for being here, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Next, Sid Espinoza, former mayor of Palo Alto. Come on up, Sid. Sid has had quite a career spanning both public and private sector. He's worked in overseas embassies, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the White House, and in the private sector has worked with both Hewlett-Packard and now heads up philanthropy and civic engagement for Microsoft for the state of California. Thanks for being here. And finally, last but not least, actually, no, I'm sorry, we have 2 more. Next is Sam Lessin. Where is Sam? Hey, Sam. Come on up. All of Sam's button-down shirts were dirty this morning, so, but he made it. Good to have Sam here. So Sam and I go way back to, we were dorm mates in college. He's a well-known tech entrepreneur, most recently served as vice president of product for Facebook, and is now a VC, invests in startups, and is a frequent contributor to his wife's excellent publication called The Information. Thanks for coming, Sam. And now, last but not least, John Guyton, who won the pitch contest last night. Where's John? All right. Welcome, John. John is the CEO of Lassie Project. He is a graduate from the University of Colorado. John played football for the Big 12 North Championship team. And the project, the company that John founded, which won the pitch last night, allows parents and guardians to press a button and get hundreds of people looking for missing loved ones in seconds. Since completing Techstars in 2014, Lassie Project has partnered with law enforcement and cities across the United States to equip them with a powerful tool that can save lives. Thanks for being here, John. All right, so it doesn't look like I have a chair. That's okay. I'll just stand on the side here. My job in this is pretty simple. I'm just going to keep the conversation moving. I'll throw out a couple questions, but this is really an opportunity to hear from these great minds and have a conversation. We'll go about 40 minutes and then open it up to Q&A from the crowd. Also, I should mention we are live on Periscope. All right. Thank you, Andrew. This is a beautiful chair. We are live streaming on Periscope. I still haven't figured out how to use it, but you may want to try. Okay. Great. So let's jump right in. I wanted to start with economic innovation, competitiveness, and access, which I think is a critical question across the country, but also something that I think the rest of the country looks to Silicon Valley for. Not that we're perfect at this by any means, but I think there are lessons to learn here. So we'll start with Governor O'Malley. Governor, the U.S. economy is facing rising inequality and competitive challenges from abroad. Do you have a plan for how we should leverage innovation and entrepreneurship to help more people have access to the American dream, particularly those from disadvantaged communities?
Sure. Let me thank you, by the way, for hosting us here. I really, really appreciate it. And here's my working theory of how our country and our economy works when it's actually working, and innovation's in the center of it. Because of our diversity, because of our freedom, because of the best and the brightest from all over the world who have come to this republic through the years, we really, more so than most other nations, are always at the cutting edge of new products, new ideas, new innovations. And because every generation we take actions to include more people in the economic life of our country, we, in the past, always had a healthy sort of demand for those things. In other words, not only were we creating new ideas and innovation, but we also were paying a living wage, or certainly a wage above the poverty line, that allowed people to buy those things. And so you had this virtuous cycle between the innovation that was being created and the ability of people to actually purchase it. Now, we started to fade away from that a bit when we discarded wage policies and started thinking that our economy was money rather than remembering that our economy is people. That's kind of my higher view of how our economy works when it's working. What role does innovation to play in all of this? It's at the center of what we do as human beings, right? I mean, all human progress is born of adversity, and it's the innovation, the creativity, the new ideas in response to that adversity that actually transform those challenges into the economic opportunities of every age. And as I look at this, I think that the biggest challenge we face as a nation and as a species is transforming to a clean, green economy. And that is all going to depend on much more intelligent, connected, empathetic connectivity with one another, dynamic grid, and an understanding of the ebbs and flows of that dynamic.
Thank you. Kimberly, if I could just move the conversation to you for a second. What is it going to take to connect people who are left behind and who are not currently able to participate in that new economy that the governor is speaking about? How do we connect those opportunities to the people who need them most?
I think one thing that we have to, is this on? Is it working?
Let me see.
Can everyone hear Kimberly?
There we go. There you go.
Thank you.
I used to be in a band.
So one of the things I think the challenges that we're facing now with this new innovation economy is that we are seeing this huge increase in STEM-related jobs. So the U.S. Department of Labor is estimating that there will be 1.4 million STEM-related jobs by the year 2020. So in just 5 years from now, we're going to continue to see this continual and gradual increase in the jobs that require technical knowledge of some type. That may be science, that may be computer science, that may be math, but most of the growth in our economy and in the world economy is there. And so when we look at where the technology industry sits now, it doesn't really reflect the changing demographics here in the U.S. or even abroad. So it's imperative, I think, that we really look at the systematic reasons why people of color are not participating in this innovation economy. We need to address the challenges in curriculums in our schools. We need to address the pipeline from K through 12 to college to make sure college is affordable for folks that want to go down that route. We need to increase in opportunities for folks that don't want to go to college to be able to get the technical skills to come back and get a six-figure job that they can participate in the tech economy. So I think it's really important, and that's really focused on the work that we do with Black Girls Code. Other organizations that are working in this space are really doing to drive the needle forward and really introducing technology to a broader pool of participants.
Most new jobs are created by new businesses. Sam, you've started a new business, you fund new businesses. How do we get more, and how do we make them more successful? Do you have an innovation agenda for Governor O'Malley? Do you have a mic?
I don't have a mic. Now I do. I think
All
it's on. So I certainly don't have a policy for the governor, but I would say this. I mean, I think it would be a failure to not recognize that we are living, and I'll play the part of Silicon Valley, young tech entrepreneur for a second. We're living at an incredible moment. The entire infrastructure, I would argue, of businesses, the way we set up the country over the last 100 years, is getting out of date. We have fundamental new superpowers in technology that have been unleashed in a lot of ways, and I really think that in the next 20, 30 years, everything is going to change. That's why you see a lot of these questions about why STEM jobs are all of a sudden, exploding, and basically the new skills that are needed in a lot of ways. So to me, people like to make the analogy of, coding is like reading, right? It's as important, it's as fundamental. I'm not sure I would be that specific, but I would say that the economy as it functions today, in my mind at least, to a very fundamental level, is very, very different than it will be in 20 years. And I think it's really important, if you want to have true innovation, that all Americans are actually in a position to participate. That's where you're actually going to get the greatest return and the greatest advantages, because it turns out, if you have a population of 300 odd million people, but only a small percentage of them can play, then effectively you're much less able to transition the economy the way it needs to be transitioned. You're going to get a lot less interesting outcomes. So that's kind of how I look at things.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to add to that too. So one of the important things to realize as well is in innovation, right? Innovation doesn't require politics, right? Politics is not required in innovation. However, implementation has a lot to do with politics. And I think it was really important for especially a presidential candidate to make the connection between the implementation of politics and how that impacts the innovation. We've seen firsthand companies that are creating incredibly innovative things, ways to make things more efficient. And the roadblock that they run into is they realize, okay, I don't have the connections, or I don't have the political muscle to push this initiative through, and I won't get the funding I need to finish it. So then it dies on the vine. And then inferior technology pushes its way through because this person has this connection at this place for the implementation, which becomes the most important part, which I think can hurt us in the long run.
Yes, Sid, please.
Let me just jump on Sam's comment about it's like reading but not. It really is, and I think the point can't be expressed importantly enough. So it is a pipeline, right? There are all sorts of areas that we need to work on, but if you're interested in this topic, code.org has done incredible work, is ramping up quickly. The idea of the focus on education in STEM and computer science across this country, around the world, but really across the country, is an issue of language, really, and there is a language. You look at those Department of Labor reports, Bureau of Labor Statistics as well. The fastest growing job sectors have some sort of computer science component, as was mentioned. Also, the highest paying jobs of the future, all of these studies show, have a computer science component. But only about 10% of American students right now have access to a computer science class by the time they graduate from high school. So fundamentally, we are not preparing kids for the fastest growing job sectors and those highest paying jobs. It's not just, though, techies and computer science, we want everybody to come join the Valley. If you look across the board at different sectors, look at retail, look at nursing, look at construction, they're all having some sort of computer science or STEM component in a way that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. There is a language, like reading, being taught to some people in our community, and for the vast majority of others, they're not getting any exposure to it at all. And living in the bubble that we do, sometimes in the Bay Area, that seems unimaginable. But I can tell you, having worked on a lot of these types of programs across the country, it is very hard to catch up. If you've had no computer science or strong STEM background and you arrive at college and suddenly you think you're going to be a CS major, that's very difficult when you're in classes with kids who have had this as a native language since they were very young. And so as this wave continues, if we don't, as a country, come together across sectors and figure out how to address it, we know this is a problem. We know we will leave the majority of our citizens behind in terms of this new era of opportunity. And it's something that we have to create aggressive agendas around to address, starting at the very, very young ages in education.
Can I ask, how young do you go?
We start at 6.
Yeah.
So.
And what do you teach it? What do you teach a 6-year-old about computer science?
We actually teach everything to 6-year-olds. We teach them how to do robotics. We teach them web design. We teach them game design. They can do it all. So, and there's a strong argument that you could even start younger than that. So I think I really agree with Sid and the reference to computer coding as a language. So just as you can teach languages, native languages, to very young kids, so can you start engaging these young students like very early, because they're digital natives. So they're coming into a different society than we came into, where they're used to devices, they're used to seeing technology around them. So it's not something that's odd. But the difference is getting them from the side of the fence that they're just consumers and just sliding a screen, because even toddlers can do that, to where they can look at a device and be able to learn what's behind that screen. And they can start moving blocks around in some very simple languages that we start out with called like Scratch. They're just moving blocks, just like Legos, but it's teaching them the fundamentals of programming.
So who has this, where's this curriculum in practice and being taught best in America?
That's a great question. So you want to jump into that? I think that's one of the hurdles that, organizations like my own that are after-school programs, we have curriculum. There's organizations like MIT and their early learning lab that has created curriculum. But we really need to see this curriculum get taught in schools also, because that's where the kids sit.
Integrated into, I'm sorry, Marcy.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say I'm an advisor to a program in Tennessee, which is where I'm from, rural Tennessee, where an organization has taken an online program called Treehouse and made it available in the public schools and run a countywide competition for the kids who started out doing this in clubs and in their free time trying to get badges as they learned how to code. And it was so successful in the first year that they've incorporated it into the curriculum of the public high schools. They run a competition among the schools, and the winners of that competition, high schoolers, win a trip to San Francisco, come and tour Google and Microsoft and some of the other companies around here, and really Stanford.
And it's mostly a high school sort of thing.
It's a high school thing. But one of the experiences from that I wanted to point out is that I went after the first year of that program to some surrounding counties there to talk about it and said, hey, we visited Google, We visited, Computer History Museum, and a girl, I promise, 8th grade, raised her hand and said, "What is Google?" And so to have kids in one county experiencing learning to code and kids in another county feeling so separate from what is truly the center of the economy. I know we always talk about it as a pipeline problem, but in a lot of ways it's a highway problem, and there just aren't a lot of on-ramps. So I think so much of what's being discussed here is how you give kids the opportunity to even imagine themselves as a part of it. And I think a lot of that is really just attitude. I mean, in Silicon Valley, you walk into a startup or into a Starbucks, you have startups that are being built at all the tables, and the barista also has a business plan. And having that sense of opportunity and hope in the rest of the country, I think, is something that could really make a dent. Because you're not going to figure out how to apply technology to farming techniques in Silicon Valley. That's going to happen in the middle of the country.
Yeah, inclusion, always about inclusion.
And I would just highlight as well that there are, it seems commonsensical, right? Here's a problem we've clearly identified, and it doesn't seem so hard to address, but across the board in the implementation of this type of new curriculum, there are difficulties. We do not have teachers trained, of course, to teach computer science across the board, and I can tell you, having worked on many of those programs across the country, once you train teachers in computer science, the job opportunities that they are offered and the pay differential is astronomical, so we end up losing a bunch of those teachers. You also don't have, when you look, for example, here in California, there are not just teach to the test, but course credits that people get at a state college level, et cetera, that incent then high schools to teach computer science or other courses. If it's not a graduation requirement, or if they're not going to get that later college credit, it's very unlikely that that will be taught at the high school level. And that's a problem that we struggle with here in this state, because we have a very low math and science requirement within the state. And
Set by state, set by county district?
Set by state. And we don't, if you're going to, the difficulty is if you're going to then count computer science as a math or science requirement, and people are only going to get, say, 1 year of math, no one wants that, right? Like, you have to increase graduation requirements within the state to include this curriculum, and that's a very difficult fight within the state, because it'll make it more difficult for people to graduate. So there are, across the board, across the country, real policy struggles in actually implementing an increase in computer science education within the schools.
So let's talk about that for a minute. We're talking about policy, how to build a competitive economy. We're talking about education, STEM. What about the political side of this? John talked about the political system as actually a barrier, as an obstacle. What does it take? Do Americans want big ideas, and is the political system capable of actually executing on them? And I'd love to start with the governor, but also hear from our entrepreneurs what your perspective is, and what would be compelling to you from where you sit.
This is, I think leadership's really, really important. And in my own experience as governor, we made very clear that our charge in our educational system was to allow kids, give kids the ability to learn skills that are actually more relevant today, that are relevant in today's marketplace. And so we were big on pushing STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Push my button, I can say it really, really fast 29 times. And our teachers, God bless them, because we treated them like partners in this endeavor and professionals, because we created a feedback loop, albeit it was a polling instrument every other year with teachers that asked questions relevant to what we were offering on science, technology, engineering, and math, and the whole learning experience. Our teachers, on their own volition, found the ways to up their skills for teaching science, technology, engineering, and math, even though we did a pretty poor job of laying out the pathways for them. But because they knew it was important to the governor, because we were fighting the fights in the political arena to actually increase education funding while other states were cutting it, our teachers saw to it that I was going to do this as a pop quiz. What state has the largest percentage of students who take and pass STEM-related AP courses of any of the states in the United States? John, why are you laughing at me? Maryland, good, doctor. Good. And much of that came about because we said it was important, and because we continued to push that. We also made the changes at our state school board so that we recognized computer science as a math or a science. Believe it or not, that took a couple of years to get done. The good thing that Thomas Jefferson did with having local control of school curriculum is it would be very, very hard for any fascist to impose a curriculum on our kids, because it would likely take that fascist longer than their term of office. The bad news is that means changes to our curriculum are frustratingly slow. But I do think there's opportunities. Yeah, since we are a metropolitan people, I think there's opportunities to innovate at local school board levels in ways that recognize that there's certain basic requirements for graduation that the state must enforce so that there's certain minimums, almost like a minimum wage. But that doesn't mean that a local board hep to the demands out there for these types of skills can't layer onto that and offer other things that actually enhance that learning experience. What we tried to do in our time was to, I think there's tremendous untapped opportunity for us to make our high schools and our community colleges really the cutting edge of upskilling our people for the coding skills and the other computer literacy things.
And is there political will for that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there is political will for it. There's certainly, well, how do you ask that question? You ask that question from a top down or bottom up? Political will from the bottom up is huge. A gentleman who had been a pollster for all of my campaigns, Fred Yang, was constantly surprised by just how aware parents were of the term STEM, and voters generally were of the acronym of STEM and understood what it meant. So much so that he flailed away at the guy doing the political commercials to say, make sure you put STEM education in there and the strides that Maryland's making on STEM education, because people get it. And so, the old adage, there go my people, I am their leader, I must follow. I think that because the popular will is there, I do think that that leaders that tap that will be able to even convince their school boards that they can offer these things. But it is expensive. Keeping and retaining people that can teach these things, the things that are available online, or what was it called?
Treehouse. That program started for $25,000.
Yeah.
For the whole county.
Yeah, I think we have to be a lot more open to the hybrid approach of, instead of thinking of the education system that produces these blocks to fit in these pegs, I think we have to think of our education system more as a platform for learning. And I think the kids, if you make the offerings and just kind of show them where they can get these skills, I think we'll see a lot more people achieving them.
Yeah. Did anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
I'm taking a side, and I'll stop hogging the mic, I promise. But since I have the forum and I'm in this room, and there are so many people who are tech savvy and have that background, one of the components that is repeatedly pointed to in terms of success, especially in communities of need within STEM and within CS in general, is mentorship. And there's really a lack, even here in the Valley, of engaging the tech community in real mentorship in communities of need. So if you have that background, or if you're listening to this somewhere out in the interweb, please consider taking it upon yourself to become a mentor for kids in computer science. It truly, every study shows, makes a real difference, and I hope that there's more of a conversation around that within the Bay Area.
One thing I wanted to add on the policy side, I think when we think about curriculum, we really kind of struggle with this question about local school boards and how to get curriculum changes through that level. But I think on the government, higher government side, there's also work that can be done. So as we're going into this phase where No Child Left Behind Act is getting reapproved and reassessed there are ways that we need to look at that as it relates to STEM education. So there have been reports on how the schools are not only not teaching computer science, but they're not even equipped to. So they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the Wi-Fi access, they don't have the resources in terms of just even devices, even if we did have teachers. So those are things that we can address at a higher policy level, and making sure schools, like the ones we actually sit our offices in Oakland, but if you go to East Oakland, most schools don't have the access or infrastructure, basic infrastructure, to teach a computer science class if I gave them a teacher tomorrow. So how do we get these schools and these low resource, low access areas equipped, so once we do have mentors that can go back into the schools, once they couldn't even use Treehouse because they wouldn't have the access to the equipment or the infrastructure to teach a class even using a tool that way. So I think as we look at that from a policy level, that is a very specific way that higher government can really push the needle forward in making the ground fertile for organizations like Black Girls Code or organizations like Treehouse to come in and actually do the work to start to teach these skills.
So let me build on that, and this will be my final question for the panel, and then we'll go to Q&A. Government is not known for innovation, but we're all here in a place that values ideas and new ideas, game-changing ideas. It's an overused word, but nonetheless. What I'd love to hear as a final comment from everyone is one idea that you have, particularly if it has to do with the way our government works or a policy idea that you're especially excited about. And you don't have to go in any particular order, but what is that game-changing idea that you'd propose to Governor O'Malley that can make our government work more effectively for all Americans?
Using data to assess the effect of policy as it's being implemented and making that publicly available.
That's what I was going to say. It was.
I'll jump in. I mean, to me, I think I have an incredible and deep amount of respect for entrepreneurs who are willing to engage with the government, because it is, from my perspective, extremely frustrating and not something that, honestly, I think a lot of technologists are willing to do. And so if I had one really game-changing idea I would be pushing on, to me it's the procurement process, which basically, from my perspective, is so broken that almost none of the good technologists that would be able to contribute a lot, make government systems far more efficient at fractions of the cost and push on a lot of these issues, no one wants to play. And so to me, I think if I could see one thing from the next administration in terms of actually practically moving the ball forward, it would be making it so that the next 20 startup pitches I hear, when they say, oh yes, and we need to talk to the government out blank, I don't say, oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare. It's probably not worth doing because it's just going to be too hard to talk to the government.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, game-changing ideas. Here we go. Entrepreneurship is all about solving problems, right? And so within government, within different communities, whether it's a state or even the entire country, we've got problems. There's no shortage of them. But the way that we solve problems in government is drastically different than the way we solve problems as entrepreneurs. And so the game-changing idea is and yeah, I get this process. I've sat down with folks and like, well, you got to understand it doesn't work exactly that way. Fine. Let's create a box, right, that fits in the government's, deal, right? But let's make innovation inside of that box so that we can say, okay, first of all, what are the problems that we have? And let's solve them within that confine, right? That structure needs to be there. So, to Sid's point, nobody's going to want to play. There's tons of people that say, look, I've got a solution. For example, my company, Lasting Project, we find lost people faster, period. There's literally kids that are going missing. There was a girl that in Missouri, they called the police. They had the name and the license plate number and the description of the assailant. And that was at 4:19. And the Amber Alert came out at 7:19. They had all the information they needed. Right? This is one of the frustrating things, especially in tech, the way how quickly things move. We're sitting there going, what are we supposed to do? Right? Like, let's go faster. Let's move quicker. And one of the biggest things I think, too, and that people don't talk about is When I think about government, I think, okay, there's going to be a request for proposal, and then you submit the proposal, and then there's a bunch of people that evaluate the proposal, and then we get the procurement of the funds, and that's how we go about it, right? But that's not how it works as far as solving a problem in the sense of a startup. We're going to come up with a problem and say, okay, we're going to solve this problem, but we're not married to how. And we're going to mess it up a bunch of different ways, right? Like WD-40, right? It wasn't the first thing. So the government could have solved the problem of squeaky doors because they'd have been like, all right, we got this contract. This is the way number 3. When in reality, you needed to enable somebody to go crazy and make 40 different variations of this stuff before it goes, oh, we got it. Now we solved the problem. And I think we need to be able to iterate quicker and find out a way to do that. That's where we're going to make serious change.
This is good.
For me, I have to toe the education line because for me it's really about access and making sure that there's equal access to these opportunities across communities. So really looking at educational policies on a high level that make sure all of our schools are equipped to teach the innovation economy to the next generation. And also making sure that even the communities that these students are coming from have access to the tools to continue that process of education. So the fact that broadband access is not universal in the U.S. right now, and I can go to another country, I won't call the name, but other countries and have better access is a problem to me. Because if we're really leaders that we say we are, I shouldn't be able to travel outside of the U.S. and see technology that's 10 steps ahead of what we're able to access, basic broadband access in the U.S. That's a problem. So we need to address some of the systemic issues before we even get to the point that we're engaging on the entrepreneurial side for me. So let's start at the basics, making sure that all of our infrastructure needs are met in educational and outside of that in the home so that everybody can have a seat at the table.
Thanks, Kimberly. Sid, and then Governor, you get the last word.
I was to say, here on that. We both have had lives dedicated to that work, and if it hadn't been mentioned, I would have said that. It is not a particular policy. I think it is a focus on how you create a cultural change for me, and that is something that I know you've seen at the city level. It'll be interesting to see how it can be shaped at the national level. At the city level, what you started to see about a decade ago is that these new roles were created, chief information officers, which really hadn't existed before. You had an IT department. Maybe they were interested in everybody, getting on a laptop versus just their standard PC, and they had these new roles come in that really wanted to talk about increasing transparency, engaging citizenry, changing the way that government provides services through technology. And that was a very different conversation. You've seen recently now, and I know the president just made permanent the Innovation Fellows program, these articles about the disruptors that have been hired at the federal level to come in and try to create these cultural shifts at a national level, and the incredible struggles they've had. I think that for the next president, it'll be very interesting to think about how you continue and sustain that cultural shift across government agencies and bring in a different conversation about innovation at a federal level across these agencies. Incredibly difficult. I don't think there's a particular policy that will change that. I think it's going to necessitate an entire dialogue and sort of a broad policy agenda to carrot and stick people into a new era of innovation within government.
Last word?
Last word. I'm thinking of so many things. As I was listening to everybody, a few words kept kind of resonating. One of them is connection, right? Connecting people to the opportunities, connecting people to broadband, connecting schools, work that we did actually a lot of great stuff on in Maryland and in Baltimore, places where just pockets of entrenched poverty. But the other word I hear is synthesis and or concept and integration, not only into our curriculum, but people into our economy. And Marcy, to your point about creating openness and transparency as to how our government works and where it works, and John, your point about the about the procurement process and the ability to connect with someone in government that can actually make it happen. I think what has been missing so far in our federal government, and I've seen it work in both the big city that thought that its problems were bigger than its ability to overcome them, and also in a state with some pretty moribund bureaucracies. I think what's missing is actually a more modern way, a more modern executive method of getting things done. There was a slide. How many of you were there last night at the, some of you were there last night? They tell me they put a slide behind me while I was speaking of the triangle and the circles. There was a time when executive leaders thought the place they needed to be was high atop the pyramid of command and control, where things got done on the basis of because I said so. But today, as iterations happen so much quicker with technology and innovation, the place where that modern leader needs to be is at the center of the emerging truth. And what I found as an executive is that if you create the common platform, if you measure performance, if we're clear about our goals, and you force people into a room every 2 weeks to ask the question, is what we're doing working or not? Are we getting better results this week than we were getting last week? I find that the leaders actually rise, that the organization moves towards the leaders, and by being in the center of that emerging truth, you're also able as the executive to bring forward the new ideas that actually serve and the new technologies that work. Well, I almost laughed because I had having been in executive service for 15 years, I think I was the first mayor to appoint a chief information officer. And I was the first governor to create the position of the chief information officer. But that wasn't enough. We had to add to that a chief innovation officer and have that chief innovation officer in the center of that circle with me at all of those bi-weekly meetings where we looked at how we were doing what we were doing to improve the health of the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, or how we were doing what we were doing to improve the health of our air by way of the energy that we use, or how we were doing what we were doing to improve the participation of our kids in AP courses of STEM and their ability to transition into those by integrating, financial literacy, environmental literacy into our basic reading and math requirements. And I think there's a need to do the same thing with, maybe you call it technical literacy, maybe you call it computer literacy, not as a one-off course once you get to your senior year, but as something that's everywhere through that. But what needs to happen at the federal level is an executive way of managing that creates that cadence of accountability every week, every day, that allows, in your words, John, I think, the innovation to happen within that box, not something where you have to know somebody who knows somebody who knew somebody whose uncle dated, the person that's actually in charge of making the decision. And I think that's where we see it going.
Great. Thank you, Governor. That's great. Thank you to all of you. I think we have time for, yes. I think we probably have time for about 3 questions. So let's see here. Katie, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Oh, here, we can use this one. This will be from the... Thanks, Matt. Governor O'Malley, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So I'm very interested in the intersection of tech and politics, and as John mentioned, there are a lot of barriers right now and regulations that hold us back, including our immigration system. And I know this is something you've talked about, and I was hoping you could share specifically how you would support legislation as well as executive actions that would provide immigration relief for both the undocumented community as well as the tech community here and around the country.
Great. You can find the most progressive policy, most progressive and comprehensive immigration reform policy is available if you log on to martino'malley.com. We rolled it out about 5 weeks ago, and it has within that my commitment to use executive action to cover more people than the President's executive actions has even covered so far. We put in there the notion of creating an independent office that actually will assess the market demand for things like the H-1B visas. I've proposed creating an entrepreneur visa as well, and I would forge that new consensus for comprehensive immigration reform and never ever give up until we get it done. This is another one where the public is way ahead of our leaders on this. But in the course of this campaign, I tend to talk about it as not a sort of check-the-box thing we do for one constituency group over here, but rather something we have to do for the sake of a competitive economy. So it's an economic and a national security imperative. But I intend to use, to the fullest degree possible, executive authority as a means to that end and as a way to build a new consensus.
Great. Yes, sir.
My question is about the systematic policy that would help to create this vision.
And it's Bruce, right?
Bruce, yes, thank you. Low taxes on the rich, deregulating the banks, pumping more oil, corporations have human rights, shrink government. These are the Republican narrative that's caused the problem. And we need a frequent and clear Democratic negative that finds the solution.
You mean narrative?
Narrative.
Oh, though some of those might negate some of those.
Story. To negate that, and exactly. And your idea of a clean and green economy is a great idea. Can you connect it back to telling the reverse of those Republican stories? In other words, like, it's just about the opposite of all those things that are in the Republican story of what makes a good economy. It's the reverse of most of that that will create the clean and green vision that you were talking about. And, can you make that...
What's your take on the opposite of this? You think about this a lot.
We need...
go through your 5. Tell me what you think the opposite of those is.
We need a certain amount of regulation in the marketplace to keep capitalism competitive. Mm-hmm. We need we need environmental regulations in order to continue living on this earth. Corporations are not people until they jail them for misdeeds. Corporations can work really well if the renewal of their charter depends on not just their financial bottom line, but how they do environmentally, how they do with their labor policies, how they do with their consumers, how their products help or hinder society. If we evaluated corporations every 20 or 25 years based on those criteria and not just do they make money, we would create corporations that help promote that clean and green economy. Right. But as long as the only thing a corporation is responsible for is making money by any means legal...
You mean like B corporations?
Yes.
Yeah. What was the first state in America to pass a law for B corporations?
Well, I'm going to guess it's Maryland.
Bingo. Look, here's my take on it. I think my counter to that is that in our country there's no such thing as a spare American, that we're all needed, and that we need a strong, and that we must make our country stronger in order to create opportunity for all, and that there are certain essential things government can, must do, and only government can do to assure fair competition so that we actually have an economic ecosystem that's creative, that's innovative, and allows the best ideas and the best talents to be rewarded. That's my counter to those arguments. And again, I think that the main thrust of every public policy must pass the test of, does it work? Don't tell me what we've always done or the way we've always done it. Show me that it actually works.
All right, and a final question, maybe the woman with the colorful sweater in the back? No, that's you, yeah. Is that a sweater? I think it's a sweater. Oh no, it's a dress, sorry. You're colorful.
Good morning, thank you Governor for coming here. So what I've found, and I'm the founder of a startup that teaches people how to use the internet, so even walk back from coding, there's people in this country who don't even know where to begin. I find that there's an absence of mandates, and it's in two places. One's in Silicon Valley. If you're a civic-tech or an education startup, getting funding is ridiculous. I can speak to that personally. I'm sure there's other people in the room who can also speak to that. So even getting your company off the ground to make a change is exceedingly difficult. And that's coupled with a lack of a legislative mandate. So in most states, there aren't digital literacy policies, there isn't legislation making coding a part of the curriculum. So how do we tackle those two problems? Because one's in the private sector, one's in the public sector, but it seems as though the absence of mandates is really what's causing these problems when it comes to the technology gap.
What do you mean, absence of mandates in terms of, explain that more. What do you mean mandate, like what would be a mandate?
When we're here in California, like we have an executive order regarding digital literacy, but we don't have any legislation that's been passed that would integrate it into school curriculum or perhaps create programs for parents or career technical education where you would actually get those skills. And I think in Silicon Valley what I mean is there's not a groundswell behind these companies and behind the idea about investing in companies that do civic technology.
So we need a larger conversation, or rather you need a bare minimum requirement at least in order to spur the counties into, and the local school boards into doing that which common sense tells them they should already.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in?
Yes,
I think an interesting thing on the, as someone who invests in a lot of startups, that I think a lot of this comes back to is, first of all, there are a lot of amazing venture capitalists who are extremely invested in and supportive of a lot of amazing technology around, civic engagement and education and things like that. So I don't want to blanket cover everyone, but I would say that one of the big things that I find that's difficult is that because of the procurement process around technology, a lot of startups that require government funding, or part of their plan requires government funding, it scares a lot of investors because of how the processes are set up for actually getting governments on board and interacting. So I think in some ways this is not to cast blame aside or anything like that, but I actually think that one of the solutions to what you're talking about is to make the process of procurement and how the government interacts with the private sector and private tech companies easier, because the funding will follow the opportunity in a lot of ways.
I'd also add to that one. I recently attended the White House Demo Day in DC, and of course it was in DC, it's the White House Demo Day, but it was a great opportunity, I think, to really see some of that intersection that you speak of between the VC community, from corporations and government, come into play, because there were also agreements that were part of that plan that was rolled out at the time where these companies would invest in certain areas, and they made agreements and wrote, signed their names to support companies like yours that are really moving the needle forward. And I think that is one thing that it was great to see the government stepping in and really driving that conversations and making sure, VCs come to the table, like large corporations like Intel, et cetera, that were there, come to the table, and also put entrepreneurs just like yourself in front of them and say, hey, these are companies that are doing good work that need to have your support, and to see that happen. So I really was encouraged by that, and I hope to see the government, this government, in this last farewell, as well as the next one, keep that conversation happening and keep driving those conversations, because I think government can definitely influence VCs and corporations to do this type of work that you're asking about.
Excellent. You all have been very generous with your time and your ideas. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Please join me in thanking our panelists and Governor O'Malley.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.
Great being with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here. Sam, thanks for being here.